Hi friends, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another comfort food for the entire family. Today is a fantastic cold day, wintry day, just need to be cozy and relax kind of day meal. We are going to make a Guinness beef stew. So if you want to see how I make this stew, if you want a fantastic meal for the entire family, stay tuned. Let's get started on our comfort food for the whole family. This is a Guinness beef stew. Yes, there is beer in it, but as you know, the alcohol cooks out when cooking, and this particular stew you cook for quite some time. So no worries for the kids on the alcohol. So this is what is in our Guinness beef stew. So we are going to have a small amount of flour, brown sugar. I did modify the recipe and use Splenda brown sugar, Guinness beer, and you want anywhere from a 2.5 to a 4 pound roast or 4 pounds of beef. So this is about a 2.5 pound roast, some yellow potatoes, some carrots, onion, tomato paste, garlic, and we are gonna have about 3 cups of chicken broth. I'm just going to make mine using bouillon, ground pepper, salt, thyme, and parsley. So that is everything that is in our Guinness beef stew. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is cut up our roast. Now, if you bought beef stew chunks, that would be even better. But we are going to cut up our roast basically into chunks. So the first thing that I'm going to do is remove all of the visible fat. So all of this layer of fat, that is dramatically going to cut down on the points. And you're not even going to notice it when you cut this up into chunks anyways. So the first thing you want to do is just take a knife and slice off any visible fat. Once you've removed any visible fat that you're able to cut off and you're down to just your chunks of meat, we just want to slice these into stew meat chunks. Again, you can buy your meat already into chunks if that's the route that you want to take. I just happen to have this roast on hand, so I am going to go ahead and have to cut mine. And basically, we want them about this size of a chunk of meat. And I'm just going to set that aside on a plate here. So I'm going to get all of my meat chopped up. And then we are going to season this with salt and pepper. So we'll get the meat chopped and then we'll add all of our seasonings. So again, this is the size of chunk. Once you have your meat all cut up, and you can see that I have quite a few chunks of meat here, we are going to season this with some salt. So you just want to make sure that you get a little bit on all of the pieces of meat. And I find the easiest way to ensure that is to put it out on the big cutting board that you just cut your meat on and lay it somewhat flat like I did so that you can add your seasoning right to the top. And then we are going to also add our black pepper. And again, we just want to make sure that we get it over all of our meat. And then we're going to set this aside and chop up our vegetables. Next, we need to get our vegetables cut up. I'm going to start here with my onions. And we just want to dice these. They can be medium-sized chunks. They don't have to be diced really finely for stew. But we do want to make sure that we get 2 full onions diced up. Mine are kind of small, so I'm definitely going to use both of my onions. So I'm going to get both of these diced up. After our onions are diced, we're going to both peel and dice our carrots, and we want these to about 1-inch discs. So it calls for a pound of carrots, so I have quite a bit here. We'll peel and we'll dice. So the last thing that you need to do is chop your potatoes. I did wash these off. Now you can peel them if you want to. The recipe does not specify, so I am actually not going to peel my potatoes. I'm just going to cut them into smaller chunks. So my chunks are about this size, and put them in a bowl here. And then once we get these cut up, we will set these aside because these and the carrots are added a little bit later to our stew. And here are our potatoes all diced up. So I just put everything in bowls, and that way it's a lot easier to work with. So this is about 1.5 pounds of potatoes, or half of that bag that I showed you. All right, so to get this started, I have my big stock pot here. Now you can cook this stew in a crock pot, which I would only do that if you have a multi-cooker, because you do have to cook and saute. Or you could also cook this in a Dutch oven, which I have, but mine is not big enough. So I'm gonna go ahead and cook it in my stock pot. So the first thing I'm gonna do is spray it with some cooking spray. Now the recipe does ask for oil, but I'm going to skip that, save the points, and just use some cooking spray. And to my stock pan, I am going to add in my pre-cut up onions. And I'm going to give them a quick seasoned with salt. It does say about 1/4 teaspoon of salt to the onions. And then I am also going to add in all of my beef and get that sauteing. So I have my beef and my onions in my stock pot. I'm gonna let these saute and cook through, get the majority of the meat cooked through and the onions softened, and then we will add some of our other ingredients. Once your stew meat is getting cooked through, can still be a little red because we are gonna allow this to cook a little bit more, but my onions are fairly translucent. I'm going to add in my tomato paste, and the recipe calls for 1 tablespoon. So I'm going to put in about 1 tablespoon of that. And then I'm going to add in my minced garlic. And it calls for 2 cloves. So I'm going to put 2 little spoonfuls of garlic. And then we are going to mix this together. And we're going to let this cook another couple of minutes. Once the meat is cooked through a little bit more and the tomato paste and garlic are cooked, we are going to add in 1/4 cup of flour. And then we are going to give this a quick stir before we add in our chicken broth and our beer. All right, once that flour is melded in, we're going to add in about 1.5 tablespoons of brown sugar, which I did use the Splenda brown sugar. And we are also going to add in 3 cups of chicken broth. I did prepare my own using the chicken bouillon. I just didn't have any actual chicken stock on hand. And the bouillon is easy. You just mix it with hot water. So I've added my chicken stock and my brown sugar. And then to that, I am going to add in my thyme. And the recipe does call for fresh thyme. I only had the dry thyme, so that is what I am going to use. And then lastly is 3/4 cup of Guinness. So there is 1/2 cup. And then, hang on, I'm still pouring. And then 1/4 cup of Guinness. And we're gonna stir all that together, and we're gonna let this cook for 5-10 minutes before it starts to thicken. So we want to give it a few minutes to get thickened up. So then we'll be back. Once your stew comes to a boil and is thickened, you can see that it is a lot thicker than it was. We are going to put a lid on this, and we are going to let this simmer on the stove for 90 minutes. So stay tuned. I'm going to let this simmer and thicken, and then we will add the remainder of our ingredients. So my stew has been simmering here on the stove for about an hour. I am going to add in my potatoes and my carrots, and then we are going to have this cook an additional hour before we add in the rest of our beer and our parsley. So here are my potatoes that we cut up. So I'm going to add all of those, and we want to make sure that, of course, the potatoes and the carrots get cooked through, and then allow it to thicken as well. And then I'm also going to add in my carrots that we sliced up. Give this a quick stir, and then I'm going to, again, let this simmer on the stove for an additional hour or so. This stew will be very thick. There actually won't be any broth. Once it's done, the potatoes and carrots will soak up all of the broth, and that is how the stew is supposed to be. So I'm gonna pop the lid back on and let this simmer, and I'll be back in an hour. So the stew has been cooking for about another hour after I added the potatoes and the carrots. It smells so good in here. Look how good this looks. The last two things to add are our last 3/4 cup of Guinness. So there's that. And then we are also going to add in some parsley. And again, the recipe does call for fresh, but I didn't have any. So I went ahead and just used the dry. So I'm going to add that in, stir that up, and then I'm just going to let it sit and just kind of simmer for a little bit longer until it's time to eat. But this looks and smells delicious, and I will be back to show you a serving when we eat, as well as the points. And there is the stew prepared for dinner. The pot makes about 8 servings. Each serving is 5 smart points. It's a good hearty stew, so I'm going to just have this for dinner since it has the meat, the potatoes, and the vegetables. So again, a really good family-friendly comfort food dinner. Thank you for joining me in this comfort food for the entire family. If you haven't already, I would love it if you join my YouTube family and subscribe to my channel. Give my video a thumbs up and comment below. Let me know what you think of this recipe, if you try it, if you have any other ideas for some great comfort food for the family meals. And again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.